Welcome to this episode of the Nerd Team. My guest today is the amazing YA author, Brigid Kemmerer. Hello, Bridget. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate this so very much. I wanted to interview you today because I have been a fan of yours for a very long time. I remember reading the Elemental series like years ago. I have them right there. They're over here.
Yay!
That was like my first introduction to you, and it was crazy how much you have blown up since then. And I don't know if you know, but we've actually met as well. I went to one of your book signings. I think it was for it might have been for The Curse of Dark and Lonely.
Wow!
Yeah. You were in Georgia, and I went to one of your book signings.
Yay! Thanks. That's awesome.
I'll plug in a picture here. It's like picture. So I want to give everyone a chance to get to know you a little bit. So if you could just introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Brigid Kemmerer. I am the author of way too many books. My 17th book is coming out in January, so it's kind of bananas. I still remember way back at the beginning of my career thinking it would be amazing to get to 5, and now I'm at 17. I have written in the contemporary YA space, paranormal romance, fantasy, and I absolutely love it. And then next year, my first adult fantasy is coming out. So I love writing and storytelling, and I love meeting readers. So I'm really excited to be able to do this with you.
It's so crazy to me. I was prepping for this interview. I was counting all your books. I'm like, I feel like she has quite a bit.
It's a lot. It's crazy.
Yeah. And there's like novelas as well that I don't.
Yes.
Yeah, because I couldn't find them like the physical version, so I don't like own them. But like I've read your novelas as well, so you have those as well, which is crazy. And I do want to actually chat a little bit about your books in a moment. We're gonna break this interview down into 3 parts. We're gonna talk about Bridget's books, we're gonna talk about her writing, and then we're just gonna get to know Bridget a little bit more. So right now I want to talk about your book. So like you said, you're about to have published 17 books. Your first series, as you said, was like a little bit more paranormal, was more urban fantasy. You've also had contemporary and now high fantasy. I wanna talk a little bit about your high fantasy because Forging Silvers into Stars, you announced a sequel to that one. And I want to know, what can we expect? What is Forging Silvers into Stars, and what can we expect for the next one?
So Forging Silver is a spin-off from the Cursebreaker series. So readers do not have to read the Cursebreaker series to be able to understand it. But it's basically about these 2 best friends, Jax and Callan, who are very poor, living kind of right on the border between 2 kingdoms. And one day a nobleman shows up and offers them money to hold a note of treason against the king. A little bit later, another nobleman shows up and kind of gets in the middle of all of this, and kind of makes them start to doubt whether or not they made the right choice about holding this note of treason. There's a lot of romance, there's a lot of spying and political intrigue, and there's a lot of magic. And I love the story. I love that readers are discovering it and reading it, whether or not they've read the original Cursebreaker series or not. And the next book, Carving Shadows into Gold, is just going to go a little bit deeper into all of the political conflicts. There's going to be a lot of romance again and a lot of magic, and I'm really excited about it. That one comes out in January.
I love the fact that we're going back into this series. Like you said, it was a spin-off. Because I remember, I can never pronounce his name. Please correct me. Is it Tycho?
Yes, Tycho.
Okay. He was such an, interesting character. And I love that the original characters from the original series are still there. We still get to know what is happening with all of the original characters from the first series, and now getting to know what's happening afterward. And is that kind of why you decided to keep going back to this world? Is that why you decided to do a spin-off?
So when I first created Tycho's character in the Cursebreaker series, he is 15 years old, and I just fell in love with him immediately.
He's so amazing.
I remember when I put him on the page, when I originally created him, he was going to be a character who was going to be killed off. What? And I know. But as soon, like the instant he appeared, like in his very first scene, I was like, oh no, you can't die. I'm sorry. Like, I love you too much. I love you immediately. You are here to stay.
I'm glad. Dear God.
And yes. And when I knew I wanted to do a spin-off series. And I just loved Tycho, and the ending of the first series kind of, as you said, put me in a perfect position where things were a little bit resolved, like between these two kingdoms. But, as we all know, in any country, in any political climate, anytime you have any kind of major change, there's a lot of unrest that kind of simmers. And so I had the new book start 4 years later. So Tycho is 19. He's right on the verge of 20. And he's right in between these two countries where at the upper levels, people feel like things are a little settled. But down underneath, when he's like traveling out among the people, he's realizing like, hey, things are not okay at all. And it was a lot of fun to explore the different kind of conflicts. I know, Gray was a huge fan favorite in the Cursebreaker series, and to be able to show him through Tycho's eyes is very, very different. It's funny. Somebody had sent me a message on Instagram and they were like, I don't remember Gray being a douchebag in the Cursebreaker series. And I'm like, he's not. But now you're really kind of seeing him through Tycho's eyes. And there's, just like in any YA novel, there's a lot of conflict as people kind of grow and change and figure out who they are.
Because you have multiple point of views, we also get to see the characters through multiple different eyes. So you might be reading things from their eyes and you're thinking, oh my God, you poor soul, you're doing the best you can, you're amazing. And then you read the same type of, you hear about the same type of scene in another person's point of view, and you're like you said, like, such a douchebag. Like, what the heck, man? Like, wow, no wonder so hated. I want to know why, or like, what was the idea that you had behind, in general, not just for Forging Silvers, but in general, to kind of make sure that you had all this point of views and sort of build the character up and then sort of tear them down depending on who you were reading?
I mean, I love telling stories that way because I think, we have fallen into, humanity has fallen into this way of looking at everything very much in a black and white, binary, two-sided manner. And nothing in life is ever that easy to solve, where it's either wrong or right, or black and white, or everything is shades of gray. Everything is very complicated. Everything is very complex. Every person brings their own baggage to any kind of issue that they might be facing. And I love exploring that in books. I love, especially in YA, because I think when we're young, it's very easy to be like good versus evil, but then as we really get into adolescence and start to learn that people are very complicated and complex, and nothing ever breaks down to just good and evil. So I love exploring that in my stories.
I do want to also talk about something else that you do, and it kind of goes back to this, where your characters, you have this theme where your characters basically are getting eaten in from the inside out with like their secrets and the weight of their baggage, as you were saying earlier. And you kind of always start the series at their, what you might think is their lowest, but then you keep sort of pushing them down. Like, they already start off pretty down, and then you're just like, nope, we're gonna keep further. And I want to know kind of, how do you decide where to start your characters in that regard, and to put them in that journey?
I am just a cruel, mean person. No, I don't have a good answer to this. I used to joke that I like to have my characters in a situation where someone terrible is chasing them. So then they climb a tree and then I set the tree on fire. Like, right? Like,
I mean, pretty.
And I do. I like putting people in as challenging a situation as I can imagine. And then I start trying to think, okay, how can I make this just a little bit worse? And sometimes it's torturous to even think about it. Like, I will make myself cry. In the original Elemental series, in the 5th book, which follows Michael Merrick, who's the oldest brother, and he's this brother who has, their parents are dead, and he has, custody of his younger brothers. And he's 23 years old, and he's really struggling with these, 3 teenage brothers, and he's just trying to keep on the straight and narrow and like not mess anything up. and something happens where, you know, they can't live in their house anymore. I'm trying to avoid any spoilers. And they can't live in their house anymore, and he loses custody. And like, I started thinking about, I was like, this poor guy, like,
the poor, and that's what I mean, where like your characters are doing their very best, but like it's like sometimes it's not enough, and that's
yeah.
horrible. And I also like how you keep it very grounded, and I'll avoid spoilers for Elementals because I do think people should read that series. I fell in love so fast with the brothers, but I think that you put things very rooted in reality, despite the fact that this is YA. And there's like fantasy elements in most of your stories, some contemporary. There's a lot of not necessarily tying things up in a pretty bow, and just really letting explore that life, sometimes a good outcome in life isn't the pretty, like, wrapped in this perfect bow type of ending. And I want to know, is that something that you did this like on purpose, or did you find yourself sort of being like, you know, like it wouldn't fit the story if it did end up perfectly fine?
You know, I do like to leave my stories a little bit open-ended, and, you know, leave the question about, you know, what are my characters going to do in the future? Sometimes for selfish reasons, so that I could write a spin-off or write a continuation if I ever wanted to. But then also sometimes just because life really is kind of like that. You know, I don't want to give anybody the impression that my books like don't have an ending. Like they absolutely do.
Yes.
But the
there are good endings. It's just that they're
but
not,
there's
like,
they're not final.
yes, they're not like the Disney happily ever after, a kiss and everything is solved.
Yes, like it's happily for now,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yes.
yeah. So I did not really like, sorry, but like I don't want to end up depressed. No, it's not like that.
No. I hope that when readers finish one of my books, one of my goals is to always have readers come away with a feeling of hope.
Yes, there's a lot of feelings with your books. There's a lot of feelings of hope and a lot of feeling of empathy. Another thing that you love to explore, you did this obviously in the Elemental series. You do it a lot in Defy the Night. It's the sort of interesting dynamics between families, and you write a lot of really close families, but that have a lot of secrets. What is the interest in that dynamic of a family?
Well, I mean, I feel like families are really messy, right? You know, and it's so funny when I think back to when I was a teenager, and from the outside looking in, people would be like, oh, you know, a family of four, and they live in a nice house, and, you know, nice family, nice mom and dad, nice kids. And but I feel like that's the same for every single family. Like when you are from the outside looking in, everything looks fine. But when you're on the inside of it, like you don't know, you know, maybe the dad has a drinking problem. My dad did not have a drinking problem, you know, just in general, you know, or maybe, you know, maybe one of the kids is really, you know, dealing with severe depression. Maybe the mom is cheating on the dad. Maybe, you know, every family has these secrets, and, you know, things that they don't talk about outside the home. Especially, you know, when you're a kid, like there are things that you know your parents don't want you talking about, and that's a lot to carry around as a kid. And the older I get, the more I realize every single family has these kind of, you know, hidden traumas that they're just not sharing. And especially in YA literature, I think it's really important for people to see, for kids especially, to see, you know, that they're not alone, that every family is dealing with this kind of conflict. And one of the greatest things about reading is that it's such a safe way to explore these kinds of feelings. You know, I get mail or email messages from readers all over the world, which is incredible. But the stuff I get from teenagers is really, really powerful. And it means so much to me, especially when they talk about how something they read in one of my books makes them feel a little less alone. That's really kind of incredible, you know, just for a story that I wrote sitting in my basement to connect with somebody. That
Yeah.
was a really long answer. Sorry.
No. I appreciate you like giving the long explanation, because I do agree, and that's what I love in how you explore the family dynamics, because a lot of the times the love is there. It's just that people have their own things that they go through, and depending on if you're the oldest child or the youngest child, that really affects. You might have the exact same upbringing, but that really does affect a lot, and I love how you explore that. I want to
Thanks.
send it to my younger sister and be like, you see, you see what I have done for no. You also explore a similar dynamic of sort of the secrets and stuff with the love relationships as well. And I want to know kind of how, because you built them up really slowly a lot of the times, even if they start off having a connection with each other beforehand, they still end up building very slowly, and there's still that element of secrecy. And I want to know, is that like enjoyable for you to write about?
Oh, yes. I love a good slow burn,
Yeah.
right? I love a good slow burn. I'm not opposed to insta love. Like sometimes I do think people just have, an instant connection with somebody else. There's an instant chemistry. But I love a good slow burn where people, whether it's enemies to lovers or friends to lovers, or where people, kind of discover things about somebody that they're intrigued by and have to kind of go through all the steps to figure out who they are. I love it. I love it.
So I'm guessing in the next sequel for Forging Silvers into Stars, like you said, lots of more romance, because things were left pretty unresolved all around in the romance department.
Yes, there's definitely more romance, and there's unfortunately some people who are torn apart. There's a lot of complex moments.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, very. Is this going to be a full-on more series, or is this?
This is another trilogy, so there will be a third book after this one.
Okay, so you're going to tear everyone apart. But then build them back up again. Hope. I do want to move on to their next section, which is your writing section.
Okay.
This is my section dedicated to those of us who want to write our own stories and get into the head of such a successful author as yourself. So,
Thanks.
I want to know, like, how do you get the initial inspiration for books, and how do you know, okay, this one is an idea worth pursuing, and this one maybe is one that is just lives in your head when you walk and daydream?
So for me, most of my stories kind of I usually start with characters. I love characters. I'm very much a character first writer, if that's not already obvious. And sometimes I will start with just like a very generic, basic scenario. So, for example, in A Curse So Dark and Lonely, we have, I knew that I wanted to do something loosely based on Beauty and the Beast. And I knew, okay, I want to pull a girl from our world and pull her into this fantasy kingdom. So then I kind of start from there and start thinking about my characters. Like, what is my girl going to be like? What is my hero going to be like? And what kind of conflict am I going to put them in? When I was first at the beginning of my writing journey, I would just start kind of there and just start writing and see what happened. But all of the feedback I would get from either agents or editors was that my stories weren't linear enough, that I didn't have a straightforward enough plot. So what I took from that feedback was that I needed to have a little bit better idea going in of where I wanted my story to go. I will never be a super detailed outliner. I will definitely write a very brief synopsis of what I want to happen. But once I started doing that and having an idea of what my major conflict was going to be, what a couple of my major plot points would be, that's when I was finally able to land an agent and ultimately get a book deal, because I kind of figured out those mechanics of the story that I needed to know, like where my story was going before I sat down to write, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you said you're not a super detailed outliner. Is this sort of, do you just make a list of like, this is what my characters are, who they are, where they are, and then just sort of bullet point like plot? Is that kind of what you mean with how you plan it?
Yes. So for example, like I'll use A Curse So Dark and Lonely. So when I started and I knew that I was going to have a girl from our world kind of yanked into this kingdom where the prince was going to be cursed to turn into a monster. And from there, I knew that I was going to have the evil enchantress. And I knew toward the end of the book that there was going to be some kind of battle with the evil enchantress. I knew that I wanted, they say anytime you do any kind of fairy tale retelling, explore something that wasn't told in the original story. So I knew that I wanted to get my beauty and my beast out of the palace and out among the people and see what's happening out in the kingdom. So I knew I had kind of these major-ish plot points. I knew that what are they going to find when they go out among the people? What's going to happen when he battles with this enchantress? And, you know, what's going to happen at the very end? And once I had those kind of major scenes, then I let myself play as I'm writing. You know, I'm like, okay, I need to get, it's kind of like if you're driving, like if I'm leaving Baltimore, I know I want to get to Los Angeles. I want to stop in Omaha, Denver, and take a trip a little bit south to hit San Diego first, right? Just have these general ideas to write in that direction.
And does this change when you're doing a series and or if you're doing like major like world building, like a high fantasy? Does the process change a little bit, or does it stay the same whether you've written like the contemporary stories all the way to your high fantasies?
So it's pretty much the same for all of them. I will say my world building methods are super, super loose, super loose. I let myself, you know, I know some authors like to sit down and like create detailed rules for their magic, for their world, for their political systems. I let it be very, very loose and try to explore and play on the page. And I'm not afraid to get it wrong. If I have to go back and take something out, I had a book once where magic gave a character the ability to know somebody was lying. And as I got about 3/4 of the way through the book, I was like, okay, well, this kind of destroys my plot because he could just ask anybody, like, are you the bad guy? Right. So exactly. Like, are you spying on the king? So I was able to go back and I just removed that power. I took that power away because it made it too complicated. And I think sometimes people get very worried about getting it right from the start. And I'm like, it's okay. It's, you know, we can always fix it. We can always go back and fix it. Like if your house falls down around you, you can build it again. It's okay.
So you're definitely not, what I'm gathering is you're not the writer that in your first draft will edit as you write. You're the let it kind of go and then go back and fix things.
So it depends. If it's something major, like taking out somebody's magic power, I will go back and fix that just because I know it's just going to drive me crazy if I don't. So it really depends on what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you are definitely, you talked about this earlier, you're very much character driven. What are your tricks to making sure that you're checking in with where your characters are?
Man, this is so hard because my characters feel like real people in my head. I mean, they really do. You know, so I don't have any good tricks for them. I just try to always think of things that might not necessarily be huge points in the book, but things that my characters might want or need or care about. And I do generally have those in the back of my head. And I think this helps make characters seem really well-rounded as opposed to just, especially non-POV characters. So anybody who's not, you know, like in Defy the Night, anybody who's not Coric or Tessa, like I want my characters to have a general idea of like Quint, Coric's best friend, or, you know, Hairston, the king, or Kari, Tessa's best friend, kind of, even if they're not talking about something on the page, I want to give a general idea of like, are they distracted by something? Do they care about something? Are they looking towards something? To make everybody seem as well-rounded as possible.
And how do you make it so that your characters, the ones that we do get the POVs, when you're looking at the non-POV characters, to make them not like know, like they know, you know, like, oh, they're looking at the window, they must be thinking.
It's hard. That really does get hard. Trying to figure out like what, you know, whether through dialogue or what they're looking at or what they might notice. And just trying to kind of come back to any kind of physical reaction and having people guess. Because really, as humans, we do the same thing. You know, like if my husband is staring out the window and like fidgeting, I know that he's anxious about something, right? Yeah. And it's just a matter of like kind of trying to be observational and let your character see what they see.
When you write the dual POVs, and sometimes more than dual POVs, multiple POVs, we still as a reader know exactly, like, even if we didn't have the little headline, you know, title being like, now you're following Coric's point of view, now you're following Tessa, like, you write them in such a way that we know exactly whose POV we're reading from. And I love how in some cases some characters are, they do pay attention to more details, and some characters don't pay attention to as many details, and some characters pay attention to these type of details but not these. And I want to know, is that something that you plan out like beforehand, when you're writing your character outline, or is this something that you allow yourself to discover as you write in their POVs?
Both. You know, my characters are weird in that they really do feel fairly fully formed by the time I put them on the page. But I don't sit and like write like character beat sheets or anything like that. Sometimes I will sit down and I will write like a list of my characters and say, okay, what do they want? What do they need? And what is standing in their way? Just so I kind of have a general idea. But things like, you know, whether or not somebody is more detail oriented, or whether somebody is more empathetic, or whether somebody is just gonna, you know, light everything on fire any chance they get. That all just kind of lives in my head, and I don't know how.
It just kind of comes out then,
Yeah,
as you're writing. Same with like expressions. I know in Defy the Night especially, Korik has a very like specific way of wording things. Like he says Lord, he says mind your metal. Yeah,
yeah.
I pronounced that right. So I was like, hold on. And so does that also kind of come in, and you're like, actually, this is his way of speaking, or is that kind of like right
Yeah.
that comes in?
And sometimes it'll filter into other books if I'm writing something else at the same time. And I'm like, wait.
That's not it. So did mind your metal
I
kind of
have no idea where that came from. People ask me, it just like came out on the page, and I was like, all right, it works.
that is so funny because that is so centric to Korg and Tessa's like
Yes.
story and how they you know their relationship. That is so funny. So did that change the way that you wrote a lot of their stuff when you kind of came up with that, or did that just kind of fill
Just
in
kind of
when you were ready?
I wrote that first chapter, and Cork said that to her, and that was that.
That is so interesting to me. But I want to know. Okay, so we talked about this earlier. How you kind of start your characters already a bit desperate, and then you amp that desperation up. You sort of really put them down to lift them back up. Is kind of how you format your books. And I want to know kind like how do you make sure that us as a reader also feel the characters' desperation, and multiple characters' desperation in different ways?
You know, with character, for me, you know, it always comes down to like really from a craft level, from a writing craft level, it really comes down to adding in like physical reactions that people can identify with. And then also, again, putting characters in some really, really traumatic situations and letting the reader see like what is happening to them, you know, as they're feeling it. And some of that also goes back to the slow burn, you know, kind of putting characters on the page in a certain light, and then as time goes on and you start to kind of peel back the layers and see like, oh, this is why this person is the way that they are, as you start to see them through other people's eyes, that really kind of allows me to make things as devastating as possible.
I think what I like a lot about your stories is that you don't skip ahead of the healing process. You know, even if it's years later, like your characters are still affected by it. Is that something that you've always been able to do with your characters? Or is that something that you learned how to write?
I mean, I feel like it's something that I've always been able to do. I find people fascinating. I love people. And I love like thinking about the different ways that humans interrelate. I love thinking about just the way different people react to different things based on who they are or what their upbringing was or where they come from. Um, it's just fascinating to me. You know, when I was in high school, I remember I took a class in psychology. I took AP psychology, and I fell in love with it, like loved it.
Yes.
And I just find people fascinating. You know, one of my favorite books that I recommend to everyone is, I feel like every woman should read it, is called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker.
Okay.
And it is a nonfiction book, and it's about really the way that society conditions us to ignore our instincts, when really, if we're afraid of something or if we have an uncomfortable feeling about something, that, you know, we really need to stop turning that off, because it is a gift. And But what I love about the book is it's written in such a way that every single chapter starts with a real event that has happened, where it's like either a woman being stalked or a woman being, even just, challenged, or, some kind of crime story, like a case study. And it's very interesting how he then goes in to break it down and like what happened between the two people to lead to whatever the outcome was. And it's a fascinating read. And I don't know, I love thinking about those kinds of things and how people get in and out of problems and really bad situations.
I love that. And I love what you said about AP Psych, because same. I was like, I want to understand. And it ended up being, I had like, I got 100 in like every test I ever took in psych, because I was like, it's not even studying at this point. I just need to know. Like,
yeah, it's so interesting. Yes.
So interesting. I even minored in psychology, not because I wanted to study it like as a career, but just because I was like, I need to learn. I'm like, love that. Speaking of like events and very realistic reactions towards people, we talked about this briefly earlier. You explore a lot of political strife. And what I enjoy about it is that most of the political strife has been from your high fantasy books. So Defy the Night, and the entire Cursebreaker series. And they're very realistic. They're fantasy, but they're very realistic. You don't sort of explain things away like, oh, that's magic. Like, oh, that's so how do you write realistic political conflict?
So for Defy the Night, when I first started wanting to tell that story, I love outlaws. So I knew I wanted to write a book with outlaws, because I find it really fascinating to think about, what would inspire somebody to hide who they are, to do the right thing. Right. So I found that aspect really fascinating. And at the time I started writing it, I remember I had been like scrolling Facebook, and I saw a friend share a GoFundMe for a neighbor who who couldn't afford their chemotherapy treatments. Because, again, in the United States, healthcare can be very, very challenging for some people. And seeing that GoFundMe made me so I started writing it in 2019, and seeing that GoFundMe made me really start to think about like the healthcare crisis in the United States, and, what humans are willing to do for each other, meaning like setting up a GoFundMe to help somebody pay for healthcare, versus what's happening like at the political level, like all the different debates and what, whether or not healthcare is a right or is it a privilege. And I don't want to get like super political on your show, but all of those things kind of started to factor into it. And just like where families are messy and complicated and nothing is ever, good versus evil, the same thing happens like at the political level. And nothing is ever just simple, binary, two-sided. Everything is complex. So when I started to write, I knew I wanted to do outlaws. I didn't want to do your typical Robin Hood, steal from the rich to give to the poor. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking, okay, I'm going to use medicine. I'm going to use access to medicine and have them be stealing medicine and giving it to people who desperately need it. And I remember when I first turned in, I sold that book on proposal. So I had about 75 pages written. Mm-hmm. And I remember my editor was like, we need to throw some magic in here. We need some magic because it's going to be fantasy. And I said, I really thought about it, because sure, it's fantasy, we need magic, but any way I added magic to it, it made it all fall apart. Because if magic solves the problem, then it's not an allegory, but in a way it is an allegory. That whole comparison that whole exploration of what people are willing to do to support each other versus what do the rulers owe to the people kind of fell apart. If you could solve it with magic, it's just too easy.
Something funny, when I reread the books for this interview, it was the first time that I realized that there wasn't magic. And I was like, wait, hold on.
It's funny because I get that a lot, where people are like, wait, there wasn't magic anywhere, because it just feels like a fantasy novel, Yeah.
It almost like I was like, is this like a historical fantasy?
It's not really. It's more, I would almost say it's more dystopian, but you can't really call it dystopian.
it's like dystopian, but this it is dystopian, but in a way, but with what we associate as fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is extremely interesting. But yeah, it was the first time. I'm glad you brought that up because I also it was literally recently rereading that I was like, hold on. Wait. As far as the political stuff goes, you said you focus on medicine, and I thought that was a very clever way of making what is a complicated, because politics is complicated regardless of how you look at it, making something complicated sort of easily digestible for people. Like you're focused on the medicine, and that makes every other craziness be a little bit more simple if you just remember that it's like medicine. And so I want to know how you make sure as a writer that you are making that it doesn't sort of that the issues with the politics doesn't get away from you.
So for me, as soon as I start to get bored, I know I've gone too far.
Oh,
Like, yeah, because sometimes it starts getting boring to write, and I'm like, okay, if this is boring for me to write it, it's definitely going to be boring for the readers to read it. So that's kind of my own little inner barometer, I guess, of, okay, this is just getting a little too heavy. Now I need to go chase somebody up a tree and set it on fire. Like,
love that. And I also want to go back to your characters. How do you make sure to keep them sort of grounded into who they are and make sure that they don't get away from you, especially the more we learn and the more characters you bring into a series?
so I will say sometimes my editor has to rein me in on that front, because sometimes I do let my characters kind of take a little bit of a side journey, and my editor will come back and be like, I don't think we need this scene. So I am not really the master there. That's more my editor's like,
Gotcha. So then you just allow yourself to play essentially,
yes,
and then
100%.
rein it in. So do you just allow yourself to even write those boring scenes and then decide like, okay, this was boring, this is unnecessary? Is that kind of how you?
Yes, I will go back and I will, just delete words depending on where something has gone on too long or where I've spent too long explaining something. It just depends on the book.
You do a lot of representation, especially with the LGBTQ plus community. I feel like they're a part of all of the books that I've read almost. And I want to know why or how did that come about that you just sort of naturally slipped into the all, representation with different types of communities?
I mean, I really, anytime I sit down to write a book, I try to fill it with people that just might be filling the world around us. So it's not something like I don't deliberately set out to do it. It's just however the character kind of appears to me in my head and how I want to put them on the page and kind of let them develop from there. I did with Harper's character in A Curse So Dark and Lonely. She has cerebral palsy. That was very deliberate because I have a friend who has CP and we kind of grew up together. And with all my previous books, she kept joking, like, when are you going to write me into a book? When are you going to write me into a book? And finally I was like, I knew with A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I wanted to kind of juxtapose the prince and my beauty against each other, where I wanted him to be cursed by magic, but she would see it and be like, you're not really cursed.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to flip that for her and have her be cursed by something real and have him see it as a curse. The fact that she walks with a limp and she has this left side weakness and, really struggles with that. But for her to not be like, this is just who I am. I'm, it's not, so that was the only one where it was very, very deliberate just because of my friend. And it was great being able to go to her and be like, okay, I want her to gallop on a horse and leap off to save someone. Could you do that? And she was like, yeah.
And actually I do remember from that because I actually ended up, when I read the book, I ended up looking it up. I knew what it was, but I think I had a lot of misconceptions of what cerebral. Oh no, I can't pronounce.
No, so you're right. It's funny because there are like a lot of varying differences of severity depending on like who the person is. Because some people certainly either need to use a wheelchair, need to use walking aids. Some people might have speaking challenges, things like that. And that's why I did put a note at the front of the book, that Harper has cerebral palsy, but she is certainly not representative of the entire community. It's just her experience as a character. That her character took so much research because it was really important to me that it's not a book about cerebral palsy. It's not a book about anybody's struggles with any kind of physical challenges. It's just who Harper is, and this is how she operates in the world, and this is how other people witness her operating in the world. And I wanted to make it as organic and natural as I possibly could.
And I think it like added to that story, like you said, it really added to who Harper was and how she looked at all the magic around her and all the struggles around her, how she navigated the world. You write a lot of really strong women. They're very badass women, and Harper is definitely one of them. And but you have some characters, some woman characters that are like the badass, the I'm gonna fight with a sword and I'm gonna flip out of a I don't know building. I don't know, but you also mostly write women who are very strong in different ways. A lot of it is about using their mind, using their compassion, using they're very strong in a lot of other ways as well, other than like the physical aspect of it. And I want to know, how did those characters came through that you wanted to play up the more feminine side of your characters and still be like, no, but she's still badass, but that doesn't mean that she's not like also very feminine in that regard.
Well, and that to me is so important to me, that because being a woman can be portrayed in so many different ways. And I love like the badass fighter characters who, can go out there and swing a sword. But it was also really important to me to show that women can be equally strong, in a caretaker role. For me personally, like, I do a lot of weightlifting, but I also like to get my nails done. Like, so I think that women don't have to be either ultra maternal versus ultra badass. Like, there's a whole range across that narrative. And I remember I got a letter about Tessa, who in Defy the Night, and Tessa is, her parents were apothecaries, so she is kind of a budding apothecary, and she really cares about people. There's a lot of empathy, is kind of like in this doctor nurse type of role of, trying to heal people. And I got an email from a teenager who was mad that the male characters got to be strong, but Tessa was very weak. And the email made me sad, and we went back and forth, and we had a little bit of a dialogue, because, just because the male characters might, have a crossbow or, might have a sword or a dagger or whatever, I don't think that Tessa wanting to care for people makes her inherently weak. She does a lot of very daring, adventurous things in the novel. Like, the novel literally opens with her climbing a wall and trying to run from the night patrol because she's stealing medicine to help save people. And I think that sometimes, we really do see in the media that women in this empathetic caretaker role are seen as weak, but they're really not. Mm-hmm. They're really not.
And that is what I like about your characters, is that it gives them a lot of different dynamic, because you're right, for some reason, I love the badass characters as well. Get me, Katniss, amazing.
Yes.
But you're right, for whatever reason, a lot of times in movies and TV shows and stuff, it's either you're one or you're the other, and there's like no crossover. And I really enjoy the fact that your characters are very much strong, and other characters think of them as strong. Like, other characters who are the stereotypical strong think of these characters that are not as strong themselves. So I do love, and it goes back to, again, you writing the different perspectives and how somebody sees the different characters. You have written urban fantasy, as we talked about, like more like paranormal fantasy. You've written contemporary, you've written high fantasy. What would you say is the difference in how you have to write them, besides the obvious that in one there's a little bit more world building than the other?
No, I get this question all the time, and really, no. I sometimes say that my fantasy novels are secretly contemporary YA, like wrapped up with some magic, because they really are. Even in my fantasy novels, all of my characters are still struggling with, the same kind of interpersonal conflicts, family conflicts, being let down, being excited, being, just different kinds of challenges. but at their core, all of my characters are still just humans trying to do the best they can.
And I'm guessing that is going to also play into your adult, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, but like that's going to play more as well. Like
Yeah.
that it's almost the same thing as well when you're writing like the adult versions.
Yes, for sure.
Well, with that note, I want to move on to the fun section. So I want to start off with some rapid fire questions.
Sure.
And then some other fun ones. Okay. Okay, so which character of all, this is for all the books, so you can, this is an answer for any one of the books. So which character has been the easiest to write?
Prince Ren from the Cursebreaker series.
Interesting. Why?
100% easy. I have no idea. I don't know why. His voice always comes to me very, very easily when he's on the page. It's very easy to write a scene. Don't know why.
Yeah. What about the hardest?
Oh, Commander Gray, also from the Cursebreaker series. And I think because of where I was in my career and because he was such a fast, immediate fan favorite, and also because he's really kind of quiet and stoic, like I would put him on the page and I would be like, Chalk! And he'd be like, I have nothing to say.
That's why he was a fan favorite, because we were like, ooh, mysterious.
Yes!
Which character's problems or arc was the most difficult to resolve?
Oh, wow. I would say, so I just turned in the final draft of Carving Shadows into Gold, the sequel to Forging Silver, and that one took several rewrites because there's just so much happening, among all of the different characters.
Which series took the longest or was the most complicated to plan out?
Oh, wow. None of them. They all feel like they take about the same amount of work.
What about which one was the most complicated to and longest to write in general?
So definitely Carving Shadows into Gold. I wrote the original first draft back in 2022. And then my publication dates got shifted around. So then while I had more time, I was like, oh, let me mess with this a little bit and see if I can improve the story. And I ended up rewriting the entire book.
Oh, no.
Do not recommend, poor choice. I mean, in the end, it works out fine. And then my editor had all different kinds of suggestions that she wanted me to change. So then I did a lot of rewriting again. So yeah.
That one. That makes me more excited to want to read it, actually, because I'm like, let's see. Which was the most complicated world building?
Probably Defy the Night, just because there is so much politically going on.
Okay. Which series did you learn the most about from writing perspective?
Oh, probably the Elemental series. When I first started writing it, it was only in a single point of view. Mm-hmm. And I got about halfway into the book and I kept complaining to my husband, there's just so much going on with these, because I had been writing it from the girl's point of view. And I was like, there's just so much going on with this family of brothers that control the elements. I wish I could, write from one of the guys' sides. My husband was like, why don't you just do that? I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had never done that. I had only ever written from, one point of view before. And as soon as I tried it, it opened up a whole new world. It totally changed the way I could tell a story. And I fell in love with it right away.
Which couple was your favorite?
Oh, that's not fair. I mean, as of right now, I'm going to say my 3 characters in my adult novel, because they just feel the freshest and the newest.
Okay.
So much fun writing it. Yeah.
Okay. Which of the love interests would you be like, I would date this person?
Oh my goodness. Man, that's a hard one. Because they all, Michael Merrick from the Elemental series.
Stop, because he was so, yes. Oh yeah, I was so excited for his book. Because I was like, the entire series, I'm like, what are you going through, my poor man?
I know.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. If you could be one of your characters, which one would you be?
Oh, probably Harper from the Cursebreaker series.
She's a cool one.
Yeah, I like her a lot.
And also just getting sucked in from your regular mundane world into a fantasy. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, please take me. Which character is most like you?
Probably Leah Mara from the Cursebreaker series. Yeah, maybe Tessa from Defy the Night, but probably more Leah Mara.
And which one is the least like you?
Oh wow. Man. Probably Korik.
Yeah. Poor Korik. Okay, which of the series would you see the most if you could pick one to pitch as a TV show or a movie or a film?
Oh wow. I would love to see Defy the Night. I feel like it would work really well.
I think so too. I think because you have so many, like if they decided to like see what other characters are doing as well, I think you have an array of characters that you could follow. I agree. Okay, and describe your character, your favorite tropes, or which of the favorite tropes you use in across your books.
Oh, enemies to lovers is number one for me.
Mm-hmm. You have enemies to lovers, the slow burn.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like forced proximity too.
Yes.
Like wrapping them together. Yeah.
And you know what? I will say you're probably one of the only authors that I have seen that has done the miscommunication trope right. That it doesn't
Thanks.
that it doesn't bother me. A lot of the times it makes me a lot of times miscommunication makes me think of like, you know, the old rom-coms where they're like standing by the door and then they say something and then they walk away and then like
Yes.
I love her anyway. And I'm just like if you could have just stayed there for 5 more seconds, dude, like just but you don't make me mad like that. So I also want to ask, what advice do you have for anyone who's wanting to start out with how you push an idea when you feel that imposter syndrome sort of come in when you're writing?
Oh, you got to smack the imposter syndrome out of the way. I mean, really. And I always tell people, I love telling kids, like, allow yourself to suck. Like, let it be bad. It's okay. Like, it is okay. You can always go back and fix it. You know, I'm constantly going back and changing things or rewriting things. The only thing you can't fix is a blank page. You know, you just need to put the words down and go. Like, just there's no way to cheat. There's no way to make it easier. You just got to sit down and write the story.
Do you still, even after all of these published books, do you still get a little bit of...
Oh, 100% all the time. And I just have to tell myself, like, shut up. Just, Bridget, shut up. Write the book. You know, and my husband will joke. Sometimes I'll be like, it's just so hard. I don't understand. And he's like, oh, let me look at the calendar. What part of the book are we at now? You know,
I love that. Yeah, I do, because I think that is the hardest part when you are so excited about a story idea that you have and you sit down to write it and then midway through you're like, nobody's going to like this.
Yes.
Nobody's going to care.
Hold on, I have a cat. Like,
oh,
what are you doing?
I recently discovered that my neighborhood has a bunch of people who own cats that let roam around. We're like a cat neighborhood. So like I am like currently obsessed with cats. I'm wondering if one of those might be a stray that I could just take. Okay, so I also want to talk because you have been in the industry for a very long time at this point. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of the industry change. And I think social media has a big part of that. Have you noticed that it's changed due to like social media, or do you agree with that?
Oh, for sure. You know, I've seen a lot of changes come across the industry, you know, probably over the last 10 or 15 years. You know, some have been fantastic. You know, the greater focus on, you know, diversity of authors, diversity of books, what's available out there, especially in the YA and children's space. Mm-hmm. I think that TikTok absolutely during the pandemic really helped blow up a lot of different books, and really kind of changed the way that people are both publishing, whether somebody's an indie author or somebody is a traditionally published author or a hybrid of the two. I think social media is incredibly powerful. I think it's amazing to see so many readers like talking about books that they're reading and books that they love and just kind of sharing it with other people. I do think that some things have begun to happen, especially in the YA and children's space, where publishers on the what's that?
With the spice and stuff.
Yes, I mean, and I'm definitely not opposed to characters being in any kind of intimate situation, but when you start getting into the YA space, I do think authors need to be careful and think about, are they writing this to titillate the reader, or are they writing this to share an experience that a teenager might be going through? And I think that has gotten very, very complicated. It's just very weird. We're in a very weird era with what's out there and what can be read. And it's funny because people on the publishing side of things think it's very clear, like when a book is indie published, which is just an author writes their book and uploads it to, you know, Amazon or one of any of the other vendors, versus a book going through traditional publishing. And on the publishing side, like people who are in it, they're like, oh no, that's indie published, or oh no, that's traditionally published. Most readers don't know. Most readers don't have any idea. And as we're kind of in this era of like book banning and, you know, schools not having access to reading or teenagers reading some really, really, really dark stuff, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it.
I think with the whole social media thing, I think, for example, genres like new adult,
Mhm.
they have been there for a while, but new adult wasn't really marketed as well. Like many books that maybe should have been new adult weren't. They were put into like the YA space. Do you think that this means that the publishing industry needs to redraw the lines of what a genre and where they fall should be?
Maybe. You know, I think publishing is kind of trying to figure out what it's doing, especially over the last couple of years, and trying to figure out where they should draw those lines, whether they need to be drawn. And unfortunately, since publishing is a business, it's probably going to fall down to like where readers are buying and what readers want.
Mm. Social media has also, what it does, it has given a lot of access to authors. And I know I've seen your threads and your talks on online. You've also re-quoted Victoria Aveyard's a lot, and talking about the access that people have to authors, and that and the yeah, like that sort of like asking authors to sort of cater to a lot of what the readers want. Is that something that you have seen, like it's that you sort of like, or are you sort of more wary of that aspect of the social media?
I mean, I love that I can be in contact with readers. You know, people are always like, Bridget, you need to pull back. It's taking too much of your time. Like, stop responding to everybody. But I love it. Like, I love it. And I know, especially when I was younger, that how much it would have meant to me to be able to just reach out and talk to an author and ask a question or, you know, whatever. I certainly can't respond to everybody, but I really do try. And I think it's just incredibly powerful to be able to talk to creators. I do think it's important for authors or anybody in any kind of creative space to have kind of a really healthy boundary, like because like parasocial relationships can form. People can feel like they really know you because they know your books or they know your characters, and sometimes that can get a little complicated in real life, especially if people come to a signing or something like that. I do think it helps that I'm older. You know, I'm 46. You know, so I've had some life experience where I can tell if, you know, if somebody is just a little too much.
Mm.
You know, and I can separate it from it. I can very much do the mom thing and be like, all right, I think we've had enough time. Like, whereas I do think sometimes, especially younger authors
Yeah.
who might just be coming into the space, it can be really hard to kind of differentiate between that parasocial relationship versus whether or not it's real. You know, they always say, don't believe your own press. And I think, especially as an author, it's important, um, you know, to know somebody might be a reader, somebody might be a really devoted fan, but that's not representative of the whole world.
I will say, as far as like the fact that you do answer to readers, as somebody who did write to you when I first read the Elemental series, um, never thinking you'd answer back, because usually the authors wouldn't write back. Social media was still sort of weird in that regard. But I will say that it did mean a lot that you
Oh,
took
thanks.
time to write back, because I was so in love with the books and the characters, and I was so in awe of your writing and how you really delved into the different characters. And it meant a lot that you did answer to me.
Thanks.
And I don't even know what I said. I probably was just gushing, never thinking you'd read it. I was like, no.
Oh,
And then you did answer, so I do appreciate that. But speaking of social media, you also recently went I guess viral in the book world, sort of explaining and breaking down the traditional publishing with indie publishing, because like you said, it's weird now. People don't Readers certainly usually
mhm.
cannot tell what is what, but also um I think as a industry, the way that we thought of indie publishing way back when was not is not the same way that we see indie publishing now.
Mhm.
Um and I you did go viral sort of explaining the difference, and I want to know if you can kind of explain it to me like I'm 5, the difference between and what the pros and cons for an author would be for traditional and indie.
So that had a lot of numbers,
Yeah,
so which is hard to do. But basically, one of the biggest questions that people often ask between indie publishing and traditional publishing is why would you go traditional publishing when you might get an advance out front, but then most authors are getting somewhere, and this wildly variable depending on so many different things, but when your royalties are going to be somewhere between like 6% and 12%, and versus indie publishing where you can just write the book yourself and you can upload it to Amazon and you get to keep 70% of your royalties. Like, why on earth would you go through why would you go like giving away so much of your money? And in the comparison, I was talking about how with traditional publishing, the first thing is you get an advance up front. So your publisher is paying you, whether it's $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, that can be all across the map. That money doesn't need to be paid back if your books don't sell up to that amount. That advance usually is calculated based on however many number of books your publisher thinks they can sell within a certain period. A lot of publishers, that's 2 years, some it's 4 years, it just depends. And you don't have to pay that money back. And you start earning more royalties at that 6 to 12% rate once books just start selling. With indie publishing, all of the expenses are on the part of the author. So designing the cover, hiring an editor, having the book formatted to be uploaded, any kind of advertising, any marketing, all of that is on the author. Some authors are very, very talented at doing that on their own. Some people have to outsource it. They hire people to help with their social media, with their cover, with, all of those different things. So all of those expenses, which can get very expensive, and unfortunately right now, there are a lot of people trying to, grift and prey on authors who really want to make it. I see people all the time, saying, well, I spent $5,000 on an editor.
Oh no.
Yeah, and some editors are absolutely worth $5,000, but there's also kind of a balance, because it's not just the editor, it's also the author needs to be able to take whatever that input is. There's a lot of editors out there who really have no business calling themselves an editor. Literally anybody can put that on their bio and say they're an editor. So all of these expenses are on the part of the indie author as they're going out and spending this money. And from the 70% that they might be getting, the price point on indie books is dramatically different from traditionally published. So I might be selling a $20 hardcover and getting 10% from that. So I might get, $2 for every hardcover that sells that goes back against my advance. An indie author might be selling a book for $2.99, and maybe they're getting that 70%. And again, these are all off the top of my head because that was all written down. So that 70% of your, $2 or $3 book is still going to be about the same amount of royalties that the traditionally published author is getting. And the indie author is the one that's actually still paying everything out of pocket on their own. So writing a book should absolutely be the pursuit of passion, but choosing which publication path to take is definitely a business decision. There are some books that would not have been picked up by traditional publishing and have become massive successes because the author had the freedom to write what they wanted. Ice Planet Barbarians. Do you know what I mean? That's not the kind of book that mainstream publishers were really looking for, but clearly there was an audience for them, and an indie author can absolutely take the chance. But then also there are some books that are better suited for traditional publishing. I don't want to say because they're safer, but they might be. It might be something that's a little bit more mainstream. So again, it's just a business decision. That was a really long explanation. So sorry.
No, I do appreciate it, because I think it is, I think with changes in the industry, I've definitely talked to authors who went that traditional route and are happy, you being one of them. And then authors who tried to do traditional publishing, tried for years, did not work, and then they published on their own indie, and now they are hybrid because they got so popular that they, they're now a little bit more hybrid and stuff. So I do think it's interesting. It's an interesting. I'd like to know what sort of the authors who have more of an established fan base think about it, because like you said, it is a business decision, but if you don't know much, then how are you supposed to make that business decision?
Yeah.
Yeah. A couple more questions, and then I want to know, so you, when you started writing the Elemental series, you were still working full time, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
um, and you also had, your kids were really young, right?
Hmm.
And I want to know, how did you schedule yourself in order to make sure that you were still writing while you had all of this going on, because you weren't a full-time author at that time, that, you know?
Yeah, I had to really be very, very strict with myself, and I really had to treat it like a job. I this is a very common question I get from aspiring authors, especially young mothers, who are trying to write and trying to balance writing, childcare, and working full time. And I really had to treat it like a second job. And women especially are very, very good at putting their own desires last behind their family. And it's important that if you want to make it successful, in writing, is you have to, if you treat it like a job, then your partner will treat it like a job and your kids will treat it like a job. Um, if you constantly make it seem like something that can be interrupted, something that can be pushed by the wayside, then everybody else in your life is going to do the same thing. And so in the beginning, when I started writing and it was really important to me, and I would say to my husband, hey, I'm going to go to Starbucks for a couple hours and I'm going to write, or I'm going to go to the library, or I'm going to go in the bedroom and shut the door and I'm going to write, I need these 3 hours. He knew that that was my time for writing and he wouldn't bother me. But then on the flip side of that, I knew that that was time that, I was getting to work on this other job and I better actually work on it. Don't go to Starbucks and scroll Twitter,
Yeah.
like go sit down and write. And I think that that helped, across the board. And even now, like my kids know, hey, mommy's writing. Now, I'm not going to say they're not perfect. Like, and it's funny because people are always like, all right, once my kids are older, this will be so much easier. And in different ways, yes. Like when they're 2 and they're taking a nap and you're like, okay, they're going to be asleep for 2.5 hours or whatever, I can write right now. When they're 17, they can text you and be like, Mom, there's something on my neck. Can you come look at it? I'm really worried. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
it's like it's just different levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just like scheduling yourself and just making sure that you're honoring
Yes.
the.
And honestly, it took a lot of sacrifice, especially when I was working full time. I swear I went like 3 years without ever having any idea what was on television. Um, just because like something has to give, like something truly has to give.
Yeah. On a very random note, you said it earlier, you do CrossFit, and I know you do CrossFit. I see it on your social media all the time. Is any of your character at some point gonna do something similar? Are any of your characters gonna
Oh
be?
my God. I do try to build like certain things in like, and sometimes in the fantasy realm, it's hard. Um, but like, I mean, so much of it, anytime somebody is like climbing a rope or running with armor or, I don't know, carrying something heavy. Yeah. Like,
You're like, and they lift it with their knees. Just like really put, that's funny. And I also saw, as far as like the exercise that I was scrolling through your threads, and that you wrote a long time ago that right, walking was a way to help your mental health. I actually recently started walking as well, and I can agree, I can attest to that. It's helped my mental health a lot. What do you like, do you ever think about your stories and your plans when you're writing? Is that, or do you completely are like, nope, this is my time for something else?
oh, I do all the time. And I'm so glad you brought that up because so it's funny, a few years ago, I started having like, some like health issues and like thyroid issues. And I remember my doctor said, I want you to go out and I want you to at least 30 minutes. And I was like, this is silly. I'm already doing CrossFit. I was already working out like 90 minutes a day. I was doing CrossFit. I was lifting. She said, no, I want you to go out and do some exercise that is low stress on your body. She said it's so important for your stress levels. And I was like, okay. she's like, just do it for a month. Just go out and walk for 30 minutes a day. Do it for a month. If it's not working for you, then stop. And it really changed my life. Like, it reduced my stress. I felt so much better. I started losing weight. I was like, how am I losing weight from walking when I was working
Yes,
out?
I was surprised with the same thing.
Yes. And there really is very much something to that. And what really shocked me, then I'm doing all this walking, and then I start being like, all right, I'm going to start walking 3 miles every day, taking, I don't know, 45 to 50 minutes. And once I got, I don't know, the endurance for doing that, I started thinking, well, what if I just jogged the first mile? Let's see how far I can go. And like within a couple months, suddenly instead of going out and walking 3 miles, I was running 3 miles. And like, I never, I have 2 different t-shirts that say, I hate running. Like, and it just, now, this morning, I went out and ran 3 miles. Like it was nothing.
That's
And it just all came from just going out and walking.
yeah. I'm not there yet in my walking journey. I'm
I
still
swear, if you keep walking, I swear one day you'll be like, jog for 5 minutes and walk the rest. And weird.
I will say, it's crazy how fast the endurance and stuff comes in, because the other several weeks ago I had a lot in my head, and so I was walking. I happened to send my partner a Snapchat like of me being like going on a walk, like, like just casual. And then like later on when I was about to finish, I sent him another one like, oh, sweaty. And then he was like, are you still out there? And I was like, yeah, why? And then he's like, oh, I looked, it had been 3 hours.
Wow.
I didn't even notice because I had so much in my head that I was like letting go, and I was like thinking about, and I was like, how the hell? And then as soon as I noticed, I was like, oh, my legs hurt. So I can't wait to get to the point where I can run, because I'm the same. I was like, running, not my friend.
Exactly.
I get eaten in a zombie apocalypse quick. So last couple of questions. So I want to know, what book are you geeking about right now?
Oh my goodness. I know Jodi Picoult has a book coming out in, actually, I think she is coming out next month, called By Any Other Name. And I've read some of it, and it's really amazing. It's probably one of my favorite books that she's written, because she's got like these dual narratives going on. One is set in present day with a woman who's a playwright and kind of dealing with her own issues, but then some of it is written historical, and it's about Amelia Bassano, who some people believe was actually the true author for William Shakespeare, and everything she's going through, in her historical era. And it's just very cool and very well done.
Yeah, I love the Shakespeare conspiracy.
Yes.
I'm obsessed with it. I think it's really fun. And if you could write a fan fiction for any story out there,
Deadpool. Disney, call me.
yeah, with Ryan Reynolds, like that his Deadpool.
No, I have always thought that I would love to do like a YA novelization of Deadpool, of like what he was like as a teenager. Right?
What? I feel like that would be, just call it something like, I don't know, call it A Live Lake or something like that. But that is hilarious. I think that would be so fun, because I feel like his humor would be even worse as a teenager.
Right? Right. And like, if you look back at the comics and like his history of like what he was like as a teenager, it's totally like the Brigid Kemmerer brand, like this troubled teen full of angst.
Yeah. That is funny. And finally, just to end this, I do want to know if you can tell us anything about your adult.
Man, I don't know what I'm allowed to say, so I'm just going to say as much as I can. No, so it's called Warrior Princess Assassin, and I think it is due out summer of 2025. It's already sold into several translation rights, so I'm really excited that it's going to be coming out internationally as well. And it is about a princess named Jory, who is best friends with an assassin named Asher. And of course, their friendship is entirely secret, because why would a princess be best friends with an assassin? And he comes to visit her at night. Um, but then one day she finds out that she has been betrothed to this king of a neighboring kingdom. She does not want to marry him. All of the rumors about him are that he is just this terrible, horrific man who is just this warmongering king. But her father is insisting that she marry him to seal this alliance because their kingdom is in danger. And she's like, fine, I have to do what I have to do. But the night before she is due to get married, her best friend, the assassin, comes to her and says that he has been assigned to kill both her and the man she's due to marry. And they need to figure out what to do. I'm so excited about it. I love the journey that these characters go on. I loved being able to write in the adult space and really kind of explore some deeper emotions and deeper conflicts. And, you know, everybody has kind of a very painful backstory. And I'm so excited about it.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a Brigid Kemmerer story if it didn't have like a painful history. I can't wait for that. I think you're so like good. You are. I can definitely see you easily transitioning into the adult space because you're very good at like adult emotions. You're
Thanks.
very good at also hinting about a lot of things in your YA. You know, like some hints of spice. So I think it's exciting that to see just in general you dealing with adults and adult conflicts and things. So I'm very excited about that.
Thanks.
And that is it. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
This has been such a lovely conversation. I didn't want to, and I had so many questions and so many things that I wanted to talk about, and I thank you so much for giving me so much of your time.
Thank you. This was really amazing.
Thank you. For anyone out there, thank you so much for watching. This has been The Nerd Tea with the lovely Brigid Kemmerer.
Thanks.
Thanks.